Apple became one of the most valuable companies in human history by doing something far more dangerous than selling technology. It convinced billions of people to voluntarily build their lives inside a system they would eventually become emotionally incapable of leaving, and the terrifying part is that most consumers never realized it was happening because Apple never marketed itself as a trap. It marketed itself as freedom, simplicity, creativity, and innovation. While people believed they were buying premium devices, they were actually entering one of the most sophisticated consumer ecosystems ever created, an ecosystem designed to slowly transform convenience into dependency and dependency into recurring profit. The genius of Apple was never the iPhone itself. The iPhone was simply the entry point. The real product was the ecosystem surrounding it, because when someone bought their first Apple device, the psychological chain reaction began almost immediately. AirPods worked more smoothly with iPhones than competing products. Apple Watches lost half their functionality without an iPhone connected to them. MacBooks synchronized seamlessly with iCloud. Messages transferred instantly between devices. Photos appeared everywhere automatically. Passwords disappeared. Payments became frictionless. Every tiny interaction was engineered to feel effortless, and every effortless interaction trained consumers to associate Apple with relief. Relief from complexity, relief from technical frustration, relief from inconvenience. That sounds harmless until you understand what friction actually means in psychology. Human beings are biologically wired to avoid effort whenever possible. Even tiny inconveniences influence decision-making far more than most people realize. Apple understood this before almost every other tech company on Earth. While competitors focused on specifications and hardware wars, Apple focused on emotional experience. It realized that consumers do not stay loyal because of rational calculations. They stay loyal because their brain becomes addicted to comfort and familiarity. Once a digital environment feels seamless enough, leaving it starts to feel psychologically painful, even if better or cheaper alternatives exist. And this is exactly where Apple stopped behaving like a technology company and started behaving like a behavioral engineering company. Back in the early 2000s, technology still looked intimidating. Computers were technical tools associated with offices, IT departments, and nerd culture. Then Apple changed the entire emotional language of technology. The colorful iMacs, the white iPod earbuds, the clean minimalist product design, and the cinematic advertising campaigns transformed gadgets into lifestyle objects. Steve Jobs understood something that would eventually reshape modern consumer capitalism. People do not buy technology because of what it does. They buy technology because of what it says about them. Owning Apple products started communicating identity, creativity, intelligence, modernity, success, minimalism, taste. Suddenly, laptops and phones were no longer simply machines. They became extensions of personality, and once products become tied to identity, consumer behavior stops being rational. People no longer defend the product itself, they defend themselves. That psychological shift became infinitely more powerful after the release of the iPhone in 2007, because the iPhone didn't just replace older phones, it merged dozens of human addictions into a single object people carried everywhere. Communication, entertainment, attention, validation, social status, work, shopping, music, relationships, and dopamine loops suddenly existed inside one glowing rectangle that never left your pocket. The smartphone was not simply a technological evolution, it fundamentally rewired human behavior, and Apple positioned itself directly at the center of that transformation. The company understood something terrifyingly profitable. The closer technology gets to human emotion, the harder it becomes to separate consumers from it. Over time, phones stopped being tools and started becoming psychological companions. People checked them during anxiety, boredom, loneliness, awkward silence, and emotional discomfort. Entire generations unconsciously trained themselves to seek emotional regulation through screens. Apple didn't create this phenomenon alone, but it perfected the environment surrounding it. Then came the ecosystem expansion. Apple realized hardware alone had limits because hardware cycles eventually slow down, but ecosystems create recurring dependency, so the company built invisible walls around its users, not through force but through convenience. iMessage became one of the strongest social traps in the United States because blue bubbles silently turned into status signals. Group chats became fragmented when someone used Android. Social belonging itself became tied to remaining inside Apple's system. That may sound ridiculous, but psychologically it was incredibly powerful, especially among younger users. Nobody wants to feel excluded socially because of a phone brand. At the same time, Apple kept removing more friction from everyday life. Face ID eliminated passwords, AirDrop eliminated eliminated file transfer frustration. Apple Pay eliminated wallets. AirPods eliminated setup complexity. Every new feature carried the same hidden message. Life is smoother when you stay inside the ecosystem, and humans repeatedly choose convenience over freedom, even when they don't realize the trade-off is happening. That is the real reason Apple became so dominant. It didn't merely build products people liked, it built an environment people became psychologically dependent on. And then Apple did something even more powerful. It transformed technology launches into cultural rituals. Watch almost any Apple keynote and it stops looking like a business presentation. The dramatic lighting, the cinematic music, the carefully scripted pauses, the applause, the language. Magical, revolutionary, incredible, and all of it resembles emotional theater more than traditional marketing. Apple understood that consumers do not just want functionality, they want meaning, they want participation, they want to feel connected to something larger than themselves. This is why people lined up outside Apple stores overnight for products they could easily buy online weeks later. Rationally, it made no sense. Psychologically, it made perfect sense, because those launches created belonging, they created excitement, they created identity reinforcement. Buying Apple products started feeling less like consumption and more like participation in the future itself. And eventually the company discovered something even more profitable than hardware sales: services. iCloud subscriptions, Apple Music, Apple TV, App Store commissions, Apple Care, digital payments, and recurring software ecosystems transformed Apple from a product company into a cash flow machine. Hardware fluctuates, ecosystems don't. Once millions of people store their memories, finances, entertainment, and communication systems inside one company, recurring revenue becomes almost automatic. The App Store alone became one of the most controversial business models in modern technology. Apple took enormous commissions from developers simply for existing within its ecosystem. Critics argued the company was behaving less like a marketplace and more like a gatekeeper controlling access to digital life itself, and they weren't entirely wrong, because when one corporation controls the hardware, the operating system, the payment systems, the distribution platform, and the customer relationship simultaneously, it stops behaving like a normal company. It starts behaving like digital infrastructure. That's when governments started paying attention, antitrust lawsuits emerged, regulators accused Apple of anti-competitive practices, developers complained about monopolistic control, critics argued that Apple's walled garden was becoming too powerful, but by then the ecosystem was already deeply embedded into society. Hundreds of millions of people were no longer simply customers. Their daily routines, habits, and emotional lives had fused with the system itself. And perhaps the most unsettling part of the story is that Apple no longer even needs groundbreaking innovation every single year to maintain dominance. Compare recent iPhones side by side and the differences often feel almost insignificant. Slightly better cameras, slightly faster chips, slightly thinner designs, yet millions still upgrade consistently because the psychological dependency no longer relies entirely on innovation. The ecosystem itself has become the product. This is the hidden transition most people never noticed. Apple stopped selling revolutionary technology years ago. What it really sells now is continuity, stability, familiarity, emotional security. Consumers are not paying thousands of dollars merely for hardware. They are paying to remain connected to a digital environment that already controls massive portions of their lives. And now the company is moving toward its next phase. Artificial intelligence, wearables, spatial computing, health tracking, augmented reality. Vision Pro was not simply another gadget release. It was a glimpse into Apple's long-term ambition, making technology even more physically and psychologically integrated into human existence. Phones in pockets were only the beginning. The future is technology surrounding vision, movement, identity, and daily cognition itself. Because the closer technology gets to the body, the more difficult separation becomes. That is the real danger hidden beneath Apple's trillion-dollar empire. The company mastered something far more powerful than consumer electronics. It mastered behavioral dependency through design. It understood that the most profitable products are not necessarily the most advanced or the most innovative. The most profitable products are the ones people emotionally cannot imagine living without. And in the future, the world's most powerful corporations may not be the ones that manufacture the best technology. They may be the ones that control the environments human beings psychologically depend on every single day. Because once a company becomes embedded into your habits, your communication, your identity, and your emotional routines, you are no longer simply using a product. The product is quietly shaping you in return.